The text sent before Lena could think twice. Emergency. Need $20 for formula. Promise to repay. Her phone pinged immediately. $1,000 deposited. Her hands trembled as she stared at the impossible number. This wasn't James from laundry. The name burned into her retinas. J. Walker. Julian Walker. Billionaire hotel magnate. The man whose marble floors she scrubbed every night in obscurity. Panic clawed up her throat. She'd just begged her boss for money. The Julian Walker. Charleston royalty, widower, recluse. A man so powerful he could end her career with a whisper. Instead, another message appeared. Use it for what you need. Consider it a gift. Lena's knees buckled against the service elevator wall. Gift? From a man who never acknowledged the staff's existence? Her cracked phone screen blurred as reality crashed down. She'd broken every unspoken rule between Billionaire and Maid. And he'd answered anyway. Welcome to Life in Stories, where love defies the impossible. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. We craft tales of hope, heart, and second chances. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let's build this community together. Now, let's begin. Lena and Julian's journey. The rain had been falling since dawn, slicing through the gray streets of Charleston like 1,000 tiny needles. Lena Hart hunched beneath her faded hoodie as she hurried across the marble lobby of the Wyndham estate, her sneakers squeaking against floors she'd polished hours earlier. To the early morning guests filtering toward breakfast, she was invisible, just another faceless worker disappearing into the pre-dawn cold. To herself, she was a woman running on fumes and prayers. The lobby sparkled like something from a dream she couldn't afford to have. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across marble columns, and the scent of fresh orchids drifted from enormous arrangements flanking the concierge desk. Lena pulled her hoodie tighter, suddenly aware of how the bleach smell clung to her clothes, how her hair frizzed from humidity and exhaustion she'd clocked out 3 minutes ago. Her shift supervisor, Mrs. Peters, had nodded approval at the gleaming executive hallway on the 42nd floor, 8 hours of scrubbing, polishing, emptying trash bins that cost more than her monthly rent. 8 hours of being nobody. Now she just needed to get home to Mila. The thought of her niece sent a familiar ache through Lena's chest. 6 months old, with her mother's dark curls and her mother's devastating absence, Mila would be waking soon in the cramped studio apartment Lena could barely afford, cared for by Mrs. Rodriguez from 3B, who watched her during Lena's night shifts in exchange for groceries and whatever cash Lena could spare, which lately was nothing. Lena pushed through the service exit into the alley, rain immediately soaking through her hoodie. She fumbled for her phone, dreading what she already knew she'd find bank balance. $9.27. The number glowed accusingly in the gray morning light. She'd bought diapers yesterday, the cheap kind that leaked but cost half as much. She'd skipped lunch for 3 days. She'd walked the 4 miles to work instead of taking the bus. It still wasn't enough. The formula. She'd scraped the last powdery bits from the bottom of the can this morning, mixing it with more water than recommended, hating herself for diluting Mila's only source of nutrition. The empty can still sat on her counter, a gleaming testament to her failure, $30 for a new one. $30 she didn't have. Lena's thumb hovered over her contacts, pride and desperation waging their nightly war. She'd already borrowed from Clara twice this month. Her co-worker had been kind, but Lena had seen the pity in her eyes, heard the unspoken questions. Why don't you ask your family? Why are you doing this alone? Because her family had made it clear what they thought of her sister's choices. Because asking them meant admitting she couldn't handle this. Because Mila deserved better than conditional love. Her eyes landed on James Walker's name. The laundry department supervisor was kind, occasionally slipping her leftover sandwiches from the staff cafeteria. He'd lent her $20 last month when her electricity bill came due, and she'd repaid him the following week, every cent, maybe one more time, just until Friday's paycheck. Lena's fingers trembled as she typed, rain streaking across her screen. Emergency. Need $20 to buy formula. Promise to repay next week. She hit send before shame could stop her, then shoved the phone in her pocket and started the long walk home, 4 miles through rain-soaked streets, past boutiques she'd never enter and restaurants where a single meal cost more than she made in a night. She was 3 blocks from the Wyndham when her phone pinged. Relief flooded through her. James always responded quickly, always with some cheerful message about how she didn't need to repay him so fast, how he understood hard times. Lena pulled out her phone, already composing a grateful reply. Then she saw the message. There you go. 2 words. Nothing else. Confused, she checked her banking app, expecting to see a pending Venmo request. Instead, her screen showed something impossible. Deposit. $1,000 from Julian Walker. The phone nearly slipped from her wet hands. No, 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 no. With mounting horror, Lena scrolled back through her messages. There, at the top of her contacts, 2 names, almost identical. James Walker, J. Walker. She'd saved the CEO's contact information months ago during a mandatory HR update, some corporate emergency protocol requiring all staff to have access to executive numbers. She'd thought it absurd at the time. As if Julian Walker, billionaire hotel magnate, owner of Wyndham Holdings, would ever take a call from a night maid she'd never imagined she'd accidentally text him. Her vision blurred. She'd just begged her boss, for money. Julian Walker, whose face graced business magazines and charity galas, Julian Walker, who lived in the penthouse suite 42 floors above the marble she scrubbed. Julian Walker, who could fire her with a word, blacklist her from every hotel in Charleston with a single phone call. Lena's knees buckled. She caught herself against a brick wall, rain pouring down her face, mixing with tears she couldn't stop. She was going to lose her job, the only income she had. How would she feed Mila? How would she keep the apartment? How? Her phone pinged again. With shaking hands, she looked at the screen. Use it for what you need. Consider it a gift. Lena slid down the wall until she sat on the wet pavement, phone clutched to her chest. A gift. $1,000. From a man who didn't know her name, who'd probably never noticed her existence despite months of cleaning his office. A strangled sound escaped her throat, half sob, half laugh. He can't know who I am, she whispered to the empty alley, to the indifferent rain, to the universe that had just tilted on its axis. But somewhere in the elegant tower behind her, 42 floors up, Julian Walker was already learning everything about the woman who'd accidentally asked him for help. And fate, indifferent to her protests, had already begun weaving their lives together. Lena had never been so aware of the sound of her own breathing. The executive hallway stretched before her like a cathedral of wealth, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Charleston's glittering skyline, marble so polished she could see her reflection, art pieces worth more than she'd earn in a lifetime mounted between doorways. At this hour, past midnight on her second shift since the text, the 42nd floor was supposed to be empty. Except it wasn't. She'd felt it for the past 20 minutes, the prickling sensation of being watched. She'd dismissed it as paranoia, the natural consequence of texting your billionaire boss for grocery money. But as she dragged her mop across the pristine floor, the feeling intensified. Someone was here. Lena's hands tightened on the mop handle. She'd successfully avoided Julian Walker for 2 days, switching her cleaning route. Taking breaks when his schedule suggested he might appear. Mrs. Peters had noticed but said nothing, probably assuming Lena was slacking off. If only it were that simple. She'd kept the $1,000. What choice did she have? Formula didn't buy itself. But she'd opened a separate account, planned to deposit her entire next paycheck. However long it took to repay him, she'd drafted 17 different apology texts and deleted them all. What did you say to a man whose quarterly earnings could fund a small country? Sorry for being poor. Thanks for the charity. Please don't fire me. Miss Hart. Lena spun so fast her mop bucket sloshed, dirty water splashing across the marble she'd just cleaned. Julian Walker stood in his office doorway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened, looking nothing like the stern photograph in the lobby. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his expression unreadable in the dim hallway lighting. Her voice came out as a squeak. Mr. Walker, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize anyone was still here. I'll come back later. Don't. He stepped into the hallway and she noticed the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the weariness in his shoulders. I was hoping to speak with you. Her stomach dropped to her feet. This was it, the firing, the humiliation, probably a lecture about professional boundaries and inappropriate requests and, would you come inside for a moment? It wasn't a question, not really. Lena nodded mutely, abandoning her mop bucket and following him into an office that could have swallowed her entire apartment floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A desk that looked hand-carved from a single piece of mahogany. Leather chairs that probably cost more than Mila's future college fund. She remained standing, hands clasped, waiting for the axe to fall. Julian gestured to a chair. Please, sit. I'd rather stand, sir. I'm not going to fire you, Miss Hart. The relief nearly buckled her knees. You're not? Sit, he repeated, gentler this time. You look like you're about to faint. Lena perched on the edge of the leather chair, spine rigid, ready to bolt. Julian settled into the chair across from her, not behind his imposing desk, but facing her, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes. I received your message, he said quietly. Heat flooded her face. Sir, I am so sorry. It was a mistake. I was trying to text someone else, and the names were similar, and I never meant to. He held up a hand. I know. That stopped her. You... No. I had my assistant look into it, James Walker in laundry. Easy confusion. His mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. Most people don't accidentally text billionaires asking for $20. Most people aren't that stupid, Lena muttered. Or that honest. She looked up. Startled, Julian was studying her with an intensity that made her want to squirm or disappear into the expensive upholstery. You worked the night shift, he continued. You're raising a child on a maid's salary. You were desperate enough to ask for help, but proud enough to promise repayment. He leaned back slightly. Do you know how rare that is? Desperation with dignity? Lena's throat tightened. My niece, Mila, she's 6 months old. My sister. The words stuck, thick with grief still too fresh. My sister died giving birth to her. I'm all she has left. Something flickered across Julian's face. Recognition, pain, a wound reopening. My wife, he said quietly, died during childbirth 3 years ago. She was carrying our son. I lost them both in the same night. The air left Lena's lungs. She'd heard rumors, of course, whispers among the staff about the reclusive widower in the penthouse, the tragedy that had turned Charleston's most eligible bachelor into a ghost. But hearing it from him, seeing the rawness in his eyes, made it devastatingly real. I'm so sorry, she whispered. So am I. He was quiet for a moment, then continued. I understand what it means to become responsible for a life you weren't prepared for. The difference is I had resources. You have, what, a studio apartment and night shifts? It's enough, Lena said, defensive. I'm making it work. By texting strangers for formula money? By doing whatever it takes. She met his gaze, chin lifted. Mila will never go hungry. Not while I'm alive. Something shifted in Julian's expression. Respect, maybe, or admiration. He stood, walked to the window overlooking the city, hands in his pockets. I want to offer you a position, he said without turning. My executive assistant resigned last week. I need someone temporarily, maybe longer, depending on fit. Lena's laugh came out strangled. Mr. Walker, I'm a maid. I clean toilets and empty trash. I can't. You can read? Of course. Use a computer? Yes, but answer phones, manage schedules, take notes. He turned to face her. I don't need an MBA, Miss Hart. I need someone I can trust. Someone who won't leak to the press or sell information to competitors. Someone honest enough to admit when they've made a mistake. This is insane, Lena breathed. Is it? Julian moved closer, his expression serious. You insisted on repaying the $1,000. This is how you do it. Work for me. Earn it back properly. I can't just become an executive assistant overnight. Why not? You became a mother overnight. The words hit like a physical blow, not cruel, but devastatingly accurate. She had become a mother overnight, had learned to mix formula and change diapers and decode different types of cries, had transformed from irresponsible younger sister to sole guardian in the space between one heartbeat and the next. I don't know anything about running an office, she said weakly. I'll teach you. Julian's voice softened. 1 week. Temporary. If it doesn't work, you go back to your regular position, no hard feelings. But if it does, he paused. You might find it pays better than night shifts. Lena's mind raced. Better pay meant better formula. A real apartment daycare instead of relying on elderly neighbors. Maybe even savings, security, a future for Mila that didn't involve counting pennies and praying they stretched, but it also meant working beside Julian Walker every day. This man whose presence filled rooms, whose grief mirrored her own, whose kindness terrified her more than his wealth. Why? She asked. Why me? You could hire anyone. Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight beyond the words, because you reminded me what desperation looks like, what love looks like. He met her eyes. I've been surrounded by people who want something from me for 3 years. You just wanted to feed a baby. That's refreshing. Lena stood on shaking legs. This was madness, impossible. Everything her rational mind screamed against. 1 week, she heard herself say. Julian's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. 1 week. He extended his hand. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Lena took it. His grip was warm, firm, unexpectedly gentle. You're honest, Miss Hart, he said quietly. I could use more of that around here. Lena exhaled shakily, feeling the weight of invisibility lift for the first time in months. Call me Lena. Julian, he replied, and there, finally, a real smile. She left in a daze, her mop bucket abandoned in the hallway. As the elevator doors slid shut, she glimpsed Julian through the closing gap, still standing in his office doorway, watching her leave. His expression was unreadable, intrigued, almost hopeful. The doors closed, and Lena sagged against the elevator wall, her reflection staring back from the polished brass. What had she just agreed to? The blouse was gray silk, tailored to fit, with pearl buttons that caught the light. Lena stared at herself in the bathroom mirror of Wyndham Estate, barely recognizing the woman looking back. 1 week had become 2. 2 had become 3. She'd arrived this morning to find the clothing hanging in Julian's office. A complete professional wardrobe in her exact size, tags still attached, no note, no explanation. Just 5 outfits that cost more than 3 months of her previous salary, arranged like an invitation she couldn't refuse. Mrs. Peters had passed her in the hallway and done a double take. Lena, is that you? The question had stung more than it should have. Now, standing in the executive washroom with its marble counters and designer soap, Lena wondered who she was becoming. The maid who'd scrubbed these floors was disappearing, replaced by someone who knew Julian's coffee preferences, who could anticipate his questions before he asked them, who'd learned to navigate conference calls and quarterly reports with surprising ease. But at night, she still went home to a studio apartment where Mila cried and the radiator clanged and reality waited with open arms. She pulled her hair into a sleek ponytail and headed to Julian's office. "You're late," he said without looking up from his laptop. "By 30 seconds. "Traffic was terrible," Lena replied, setting his coffee on the desk. Black, 2 sugars, exactly 195 degrees. "You walk to work." "Pedestrian traffic." She pulled up his calendar on her tablet. "You have the Baxter merger at 9, lunch with the Charleston Development Board at noon, and the interview with Forbes at 3. Julian finally looked up, and something flickered in his eyes when he saw her outfit. "That fits well." Heat crept up her neck. "You shouldn't have—" "I needed my assistant to look professional. Consider it a uniform." His tone was casual, but his gaze lingered a beat too long before returning to his screen. "The Baxter merger. Pull the files." She'd learned not to argue. The days blurred together in a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. Spreadsheets, phone calls, learning to translate Julian's clipped directives into actionable tasks. He was demanding but never cruel, expecting excellence but patient when she stumbled. The whispers started during week 2. Lena felt them in the break room, conversations that stopped when she entered, eyes that tracked her movements with barely concealed curiosity. Clara from housekeeping had cornered her by the elevators. "So you're his assistant now?" The emphasis carried weight. "Temporarily," Lena had said. "Right. Temporarily." Clara's smile hadn't reached her eyes. "Must be nice. Going from scrubbing floors to sitting in corner offices." The accusation, unspoken but clear, had followed Lena for days. She worked harder to compensate, staying late, triple-checking every task, determined to prove she'd earned this position through competence, not whatever they thought. Julian noticed, of course. "You're here until midnight every night," he said one evening, 3 weeks in. "Go home, see your niece." "I want to finish the quarterly report." "Lena." He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "You're allowed to have a life," says the man who sleeps in his office. A pause. Then unexpectedly he smiled. "Touché." It was the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face, softening the sharp edges, reaching his eyes, making him look years younger. Lena's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Tell me about Mila," Julian said, leaning back in his chair. "How is she?" Lena pulled out her phone, showing him a photo from that morning. Mila in her high chair, face covered in mashed banana, grinning toothlessly at the camera. Julian studied the image for a long moment. "She has your sister's smile." "You can tell that from a photo?" "You carry a picture of your sister in your wallet. I've seen you look at it when you think no one's watching." His voice gentled. "She's beautiful. They both are." Lena's throat tightened. She'd been so careful to keep her grief private, contained to the moments between waking and sleeping, but Julian saw through her walls with unnerving accuracy. "She would have been a great mother," Lena whispered. "You already are." The words landed like a benediction. Lena blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simple kindness from a man who understood loss in ways most people never would. The next morning, a package waited on her desk. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small stuffed bear with button eyes and a blue ribbon around its neck. "What's this?" Lena asked, holding it up. Julian barely glanced over. "Hotel lost and found. Been sitting there for months. Thought Mila might want it." But the bear was pristine, clearly new, and the designer tag tucked inside the ribbon told a different story. Lena said nothing, just tucked the bear carefully in her bag, something warm unfurling in her chest. By week 4, they'd developed an easy rhythm. Julian would dictate notes while pacing. Lena would organize his chaos into coherent structure. He'd grown comfortable sharing frustrations about difficult board members. She'd started challenging his more ruthless business decisions. "You can't just fire 30 people because of one bad quarter," she'd said during a particularly heated discussion. "I can do whatever I want, it's my company." "Doesn't make it right." He'd stared at her, jaw tight, then picked up the phone and called HR. "Delay the layoffs. Find budget cuts elsewhere." After he hung up, he'd met her eyes, happy. "Getting there." His mouth had twitched. "You're the only person who argues with me." "Someone needs to." "Maybe." Then quieter. "Don't stop." The night of the storm, Lena had stayed late finishing the investor presentation. Julian was in his office, though she'd barely seen him all day. Back-to-back meetings, his mood progressively darkening with each one. Around 11, the lights flickered, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the hallway in eerie red. Thunder rumbled, close enough to rattle the windows. Through the glass walls, Charleston disappeared behind sheets of rain. Lena grabbed a flashlight from the emergency kit and headed toward Julian's office, telling herself she was just checking the backup systems. She found him standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, silhouetted against the storm. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating his profile. The set of his shoulders, the tension in his jaw, the way he stood perfectly still as chaos raged outside. "You shouldn't be here," he said without turning. "Neither should you." Lena approached slowly, drawn by something she didn't want to name. "The building's evacuating. Lightning struck the transformer." "I know." "Julian." He turned then, and the look in his eyes stole her breath, vulnerable, raw, like the storm had stripped away every careful layer he maintained. "Do you know what today is?" His voice was rough. Lena shook her head. 3 years. 3 years since I lost them." Understanding crashed over her. The bad mood, the isolation, the way he'd barely looked at anyone all day. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." "How could you?" Lightning flashed again, and in its brief illumination she saw the grief etched into every line of his face. "I don't talk about it, don't acknowledge it, just work through it until it's over. That's not healthy. Neither is falling apart." He moved closer, and suddenly the space between them felt charged, electric, dangerous. "But then you happened. You and your accidental text and your fierce love for a child who isn't even yours. You made me remember what it feels like to—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "To what?" Lena's pulse hammered. Thunder drowned out whatever he might have said. The building shuddered, and then Julian's hand was reaching out, fingers brushing hers. Tentative, questioning, setting every nerve ending alight. Lena should pull away. Should remember the gulf between them, the whispers, the impossible nature of whatever this was becoming. Instead, her fingers curled around his. Lightning illuminated them both. Billionaire and Maid, grief and hope, two broken people standing in the darkness, holding on. "Lena," Julian breathed, and her name had never sounded like that before. Like prayer. Like confession. She looked up, meeting his eyes in the storm's electric glow, saw her own longing reflected back, magnified, terrifying. "We can't," she whispered. "I know." But neither of them moved. Neither let go. The storm raged outside as the one between them finally, inevitably, broke. Lena woke to sunlight streaming through her apartment window and Mila's soft cooing from the crib beside her bed. For one blissful moment, she forgot everything. The storm, the touch, the way Julian had whispered her name like it meant something sacred. Then reality crashed in, and her chest tightened with the weight of what had almost happened. She'd left the office at midnight, Julian's fingers still burning against hers, his unfinished confession hanging in the air between them. They'd stood in that charged silence until security announced the all clear, until the moment shattered and professionalism returned like armor. "Get home safe," he'd said, voice carefully neutral. "You too," she'd whispered. Neither had acknowledged what had passed between them. Neither had to now. In the gray morning light, Lena pulled herself from bed and padded to the kitchenette, stepping over the stack of business books she'd been studying, past the professional clothes hanging on her closet door, evidence of a life that had felt impossible 6 weeks ago. That's when she saw it. A white envelope slipped under her door. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, recognizing the weight of expensive stationery, the embossed Wyndham Holdings logo in the corner. Inside, crisp paper and careful penmanship. Dear Lena, effective immediately, your temporary position as executive assistant is concluded, compensation enclosed. Thank you for your service. You reminded me what it feels like to care again. Please don't think this ends here. J.W. Beneath the note, a check Lena's vision blurred as she registered the number. $50,000. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor, back against the door, check clutched in shaking hands. Enough money to change everything, to move to a real apartment with a separate bedroom for Mila, to buy a car, to stop calculating every dollar, stop choosing between formula and electricity, stop living in constant terror of the next crisis. Freedom, security, everything she'd prayed for. So why did it feel like her heart was breaking? Because he'd given her money instead of staying. Because he'd decided what she needed without asking what she wanted. Because that note, please don't think this ends here, felt like a promise and a goodbye in the same breath Mila's coo turned into a cry, and Lena forced herself upright, wiping her eyes, shoving the check and letter into her pocket. She lifted her niece from the crib, pressing a kiss to her soft curls. "It's okay, baby girl," she whispered, even as tears slid down her cheeks. "We're okay. We're going to be okay." She prepared Mila's bottle. Expensive formula now, the kind she'd never been able to afford, bought with the money Julian had given her weeks ago. Money that had started everything. As Mila drank, eyes drifting closed in contentment, Lena remembered Julian's smile when she'd shown him photos, the careful way he'd asked about her sister. The stuffed bear that definitely hadn't come from Lost and Found. The way he'd looked at her during the storm, like she was something precious, something worth risking the carefully constructed walls around his grief. "He let me go because he cares," Lena murmured to Mila. "Because he thinks I deserve better than whatever we could be." But what if she wanted to make that choice herself? Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Peters. "Heard you're off the executive floor night shift, still needs you if you want your old position back." Lena stared at the message, something fierce rising in her chest. She didn't want her old position back. She didn't want to be invisible again, scrubbing floors while life happened 42 stories above her. She wanted... No. She couldn't afford to want. Not when wanting led to depending, and depending led to heartbreak. She'd learned that lesson when her parents turned their backs on her sister when Jenna died and left her drowning. She'd survived this the same way she'd survived everything else, by standing on her own 2 feet. Even if those feet suddenly felt unsteady, 42 floors above Charleston, Julian Walker stood in his penthouse, watching rain from last night's storm evaporate in the morning sun. He hadn't slept. Lena's employment application sat on his desk, worn from repeated readings. Simple qualifications, high school diploma, 2 years of housekeeping experience, emergency contact. None. That single word, none, destroyed him every time he read it. She'd been completely alone, and he'd dragged her into his world, let himself need her, let himself feel again, then sent her away with a check like she was any other employee he could pay off. "Mr. Walker?" His head of HR, Patricia, appeared in the doorway. "Should I process Miss Hart's final payroll?" Julian's jaw tightened. "No." "Sir?" "Keep her on the books, full salary. Benefits." He turned from the window, meeting Patricia's confused expression. "Call it a severance package. Extended. For how long? Until I say otherwise. Patricia nodded slowly, too professional to question further. After she left, Julian returned to the window, to the view of a city that suddenly felt emptier. He'd convinced himself he was doing the right thing, giving Lena her freedom, letting her build a life without the complications of a broken billionaire and the impossible chasm between their worlds. But Wright felt a lot like cowardice. His phone sat on the desk, Lena's contact information one tap away. He'd drafted a dozen messages since dawn. I'm sorry. Come back. I didn't mean for it to end like this, all deleted, all insufficient. What could he possibly say that would make sense of giving her everything except the one thing that mattered, the truth, that somewhere between a mistaken text and a storm, she'd become essential. Julian picked up the stuffed bear sitting on his desk, Mila's twin, purchased at the same time. He'd kept one, unable to explain why, even to himself. You're a fool, he muttered to his reflection. But he didn't send the text, didn't call, just stood in his empty penthouse and let the morning light illuminate everything he'd chosen to walk away from. 3 weeks later, Lena walked past the Wyndham estate carrying Mila in a new stroller, heading to the pediatrician appointment she could finally afford. She'd moved to a better apartment, started online business classes, built a future with Julian's money and her own determination. She told herself she was fine, that seeing the building didn't hurt, that she'd moved on from a man she'd known for barely a month. Then the lobby doors opened and Julian stepped out. He froze mid-stride, phone halfway to his ear. Their eyes met across 20 feet of marble and morning sunlight Lena's breath caught. He looked thinner, shadows under his eyes, tie slightly askew, in a way she would have fixed without thinking. Professional armor intact, but somehow diminished, Mila squealed, reaching toward him with recognition that pierced Lena's chest. Julian lowered his phone slowly, taking one step forward. Then another people flowed around them, hotel guests, business executives, the machinery of his empire. But they stood in a bubble of stillness, the world narrowing to just this moment. He looked at Mila first, something softening in his expression. Then his gaze lifted to Lena's, and she saw everything he hadn't said in the letter. I miss you, I was wrong. Please. Lena's fingers tightened on the stroller handle. She should keep walking, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak of wanting someone whose world would never truly align with hers. But Mila was reaching for him, babbling in her wordless language, and Julian was looking at them both like they were the answer to a question he'd been too afraid to ask. Hi, Lena whispered. Hi, Julian replied, voice rough with disuse. No words for what had passed between them. No explanation for the money or the letter or the 3 weeks of silence. Just recognition. Just the electric current that still hummed in the space between them. Just an unfinished story waiting for its next chapter. The mistaken text message, glowing in the dark. The midnight meeting, grief finding its mirror. The storm touch, lightning illuminating possibility. The letter in the morning light, freedom wrapped in heartbreak. One text changed her life, but maybe, just maybe, it also changed his.
Thank you for experiencing Lena and Julian's story with me. If their journey touched your heart, please subscribe and share this video. It helps more than you know. Comment below, Team Lena or Team Julian. I read every message. Until next time, keep believing in love's power to transform.